Morning light slowly slips into the room. Birds are singing outside, the kind of sound people associate with peace, with beginnings. But inside this space, morning doesn't belong to her. It never has. She opens her eyes, not because she is rested, not because she chooses to, but because someone else is awake. Her day does not begin with a plan. It begins with obedience. Before her feet even touch the floor, her mind is already working. What mood will her mistress be in today? Will the dress fit perfectly? Will a single mistake cost her comfort? Or worse? She rises quietly, carefully, knowing that even silence can be judged. Every movement matters. Every second belongs to someone else. She lives inside the house, close to silk dresses, mirrors, enslavers, perfume, and whispered conversations. From the outside, it might look like a better life. Cleaner, softer, safer. But proximity is not protection. Being close to power does not mean you have any. She will spend the day making another woman beautiful, brushing hair she can never wear the same way, choosing fabrics she will never own, creating elegance she is not allowed to enjoy. She will hear secrets, fears, frustrations, yet share none of her own. Her presence is constant, but her voice is optional. And that's the cruel illusion. People often ask, was being a house slave easier? Was serving inside the great house a privilege? Did closeness ever mean safety? But here's the truth no one likes to sit with. When you wake up only because someone else is awake, when your body moves but your life does not, how different is comfort from captivity? This is not a story about a single morning. This is a story about a life that was never truly hers. For generations, the Lees were among Virginia's elite. They had land, money, political influence, and a name that opened doors. Their lives were filled with fine meals, imported fabrics, social gatherings, and conversations about power and legacy. From the outside, Stratford Plantation appeared calm and prosperous, almost timeless. But that elegance did not come from comfort or ease. It came from labor that was hidden in plain sight. Every polished surface, every carefully prepared meal, every perfectly maintained room was made possible by enslaved people whose exhaustion kept the plantation running. Their sweat sustained the beauty. Their suffering funded the luxury. The plantation was not a single world. It was two worlds existing side by side. One lived in the great house, surrounded by privilege. The other lived in the shadows, in quarters and fields, carrying the physical and emotional cost of that privilege. At first glance, the difference seemed obvious. The fields were harsh, punishing, and relentless. The great house looked calmer, cleaner, almost humane. But that contrast was only on the surface. Inside the great house, control was constant, and every action was watched. Freedom did not exist in either place. It simply wore different disguises. Within this environment existed a role that many assumed was easier, the lady's maid. A lady's maid was not just a servant. She was a carefully trained tool. Her work did not involve endless hours in the fields, but it demanded something just as costly, her mind. She was responsible for dressing her mistress, managing clothing throughout the day, styling hair, preparing cosmetics, and keeping up with the latest fashions. She needed a sharp eye, steady hands, and the ability to anticipate needs before they were spoken. Silence was one of her most important skills. So was emotional control. She had to be intelligent, creative, and observant, yet never appear threatening. The more skilled she became, the more valuable she was. And the more valuable she was, the tighter the control over her life became. Her work was not backbreaking, but it was mentally crushing. Her name appears quietly in the records. No portrait, no personal letters, no description of her voice, her dreams, or her fears. Just a single name written in ink, Fick. In a 1776 probate record belonging to Philip Ludwell Lee, she is listed not as a person, but as property, one of many enslaved individuals whose lives were reduced to financial value on a page. We do not know for certain if Fick was the lady's maid to Elizabeth Steptoe Lee. History rarely gives that kind of clarity to enslaved women, but based on her skills, her placement, and the roles recorded at Stratford Hall, it is possible, perhaps even likely, that she served in that position. What survives in the archives are fragments. What is missing are the details that would have made her fully human to us. Her thoughts, her emotions, her private resistance. The records tell us what she was worth. They tell us where she was assigned. They tell us when she was moved, borrowed, or used as collateral. What they do not tell us is who she was beyond those functions. That absence is not accidental. Enslaved people were documented as assets, not individuals. Their identities were erased so ownership could be clean and unquestioned. This is the tension at the heart of her story. Fick had a name, a body, skills, and a life she experienced moment by moment. Yet on paper, she existed as property, something that could be listed, valued, and exchanged. Her humanity lived in real time. Her identity survived only in fragments. Her days began in a way that felt almost ordinary. Around 7:30 in the morning, later than many other enslaved workers, she would rise. But later did not mean freer. Her schedule was not her own. She woke when her mistress woke. Her body followed another person's rhythm, not her own needs. Before the day truly began, she had to be presentable. Her clothing, her hair, her appearance were all closely monitored. Unlike those working in the fields, she had little control over how she looked. Cleanliness was expected at all times. Dirt was unacceptable, yet soap was not always provided. She was required to look spotless, regardless of the resources given to her. Every morning was a quiet reminder. Her body was visible, regulated, and never fully her own. Inside the great house, clothing was never just about fabric, it was about control. Enslaved household servants were expected to look a certain way at all times, because their appearance reflected directly on the family that owned them. Their bodies became part of the plantation's image, visible proof of order, discipline, and status. What they wore was not chosen for comfort or self-expression, but to please the eyes of the enslavers and their guests. A lady's maid might receive hand-me-down dresses from her mistress, garments that had already lived one life before reaching her. Sometimes she was sent to a dressmaker. Other times, she was ordered to sew the clothing herself. But no matter how skilled she became, the result was the same. She created beauty she was not allowed to claim. The finest stitches, the neatest hems, the most fashionable cuts, none of it belonged to her. Runaway advertisements from the period give us hauntingly detailed descriptions of what enslaved women wore. They listed jackets, petticoats, cloaks, hats, shoes, stockings, itemized as carefully as stolen goods. A woman named Sarah was described as carrying multiple changes of clothing: red and white calico, flannel petticoats, a purple cloth cloak, silk hats, linen shifts, leather shoes. These details were meant to help capture her, but today, they reveal something else. How closely enslaved bodies were tracked, even through fabric. The irony is impossible to ignore. A lady's maid was trained in fashion. She understood trends, fabrics, and style. She dressed another woman to be admired, while her own body remained owned. She could learn refinement, but never freedom. Elizabeth Steptoe Lee lived at the center of this world. Married young into wealth and status, she became the mistress of Stratford Hall. The smooth operation of the great house fell under her authority. She directed and supervised all domestic enslaved workers, deciding who did what, when, and how. Meals, household routines, social visits, everything passed through her decisions. Yet despite this power, she rarely performed physical labor herself. Her hands stayed clean. Her dresses stayed pristine. The actual work, cooking, cleaning, sewing, dressing, was carried out by enslaved women like Fick. Even something as personal as getting dressed was not done alone. A lady's maid stood close, adjusting sleeves, fastening buttons, smoothing fabric. She was always present, yet never acknowledged as an equal. Always nearby, always watching, always ready. Like a shadow, she followed her mistress through the rhythms of the day, essential, invisible, and impossible to escape. The relationship between a mistress and her lady's maid often appeared intimate from the outside. They spent long hours together in private spaces, bedchambers, dressing rooms, quiet corners of the great house. The mistress spoke freely. She complained, worried, laughed, and confided. To her, the lady's maid was always there, always listening, always available. That closeness could easily be mistaken for trust. But it was never equal. The friendship moved in only one direction. The maid was expected to absorb emotions, secrets, and frustrations without ever offering her own in return. She learned when to smile, when to nod, when to stay silent. This was a form of survival known today as code switching, adjusting language, tone, and behavior depending on who held power in the room. Every word was calculated, every reaction was controlled. She could hear her mistress speak about fears, disappointments, even kindness, but she could never reveal her own pain. Her inner life remained hidden, locked away for safety. Listening was part of her labor. Silence was part of her protection. This balance was fragile. A lady's maid walked a constant tightrope. She had to be intelligent enough to be useful, creative enough to solve problems, and observant enough to anticipate needs before they were spoken. But intelligence itself could be dangerous. Appearing too clever risked resentment or suspicion. Knowledge, when held by an enslaved woman, could feel threatening to those in power. At the same time, she could not appear weak or careless. Meekness was not submission. It was strategy. She learned to read moods the way others read clocks. A tone of voice, a glance, a pause. Each one signaled what kind of day it would be. Survival depended on that awareness. One wrong expression, one misunderstood moment, one perceived attitude, and everything could change. Despite this vulnerability, the lady's maid occupied a unique position. She became a quiet pipeline of information. Through her, news moved from the great house to the enslaved community. She often heard about upcoming slave sales, changes in travel permissions, punishments, or household decisions before anyone else did. If she chose, she could warn others, but every warning carried risk. Trust had to be earned. Silence could be safer than honesty. Her position gave her access, but never protection. Her day was never truly her own. From the moment she stepped into the morning light, she was already in service, moving through a carefully choreographed schedule that seemed endless. Wardrobe changes were constant. Dresses, petticoats, and cloaks had to be flawless. Every seam aligned, every fold perfect. She adjusted ribbons, smoothed collars, pinned fabric just so. Hair had to be impeccable. Makeup needed refreshing, though she could never apply it to herself. Every detail reflected her mistress's status, not her own. Throughout the day, she followed her mistress like a shadow. She carried the invisible weight of anticipation, ready at a moment's notice. A guest might arrive unexpectedly. A letter might arrive with instructions. She could be summoned again and again for adjustments, touch-ups, or small errands, moving silently, quickly, efficiently. Rest was not guaranteed. Every pause was temporary. Every sigh could be noted. Her life existed in the interstices of someone else's schedule, always present, never resting. Yet the irony was cruel. She created beauty she could never claim. Dresses she sewed, styled, and polished were never hers to wear. She blended powders, painted cheeks, applied hairpins and ornaments she could never enjoy. Her hands turned ordinary materials into elegance, yet her own reflection in the mirror remained untouched by privilege. The perfection she achieved for another person's life highlighted the fractures in her own. Pristine fabrics, sparkling adornments, polished surfaces, they contrasted sharply with the life she lived, a life of restriction, vigilance, and suppression. Each finished gown was a reminder that she could create freedom, but never possess it. Night brought no relief. Her mistress went to bed only after the household had quieted, and the lady's maid followed shortly after. Sometimes guests lingered late into the night, requiring her to stay awake close by until the rising sun. Exhaustion became a constant companion. Physical fatigue from hours of precise labor, mental strain from navigating the delicate balance of visibility and silence. Sleep, if it came at all, was borrowed, a brief interlude in a life dictated entirely by someone else's schedule. She closed her eyes not as a reward but as a necessity, knowing that tomorrow the cycle would begin again. Records give us a glimpse, and then silence swallows her story. In 1801, Fick was listed as collateral for a debt at the Westmoreland courthouse. Ownership could be transferred, borrowed, or leveraged like currency, and in that moment, she became part of a transaction far larger than herself. The details of her life, her feelings, her struggles, were irrelevant to the ledgers and court documents that defined her existence. She was property first, person second, if at all. By 1807, she appears one final time, standing at the doorway of a home, a shadow of presence for the next generation. Beyond that, nothing. No letters, no diaries, no traces of her thoughts. She disappears from the historical record, her life reduced to names and dates, her identity swallowed by the institution that defined her. And yet, in these fragments, her reality survives, a testament to labor, endurance, and resilience that history often refuses to fully recognize. The story of Fick challenges the comforting myths we tell ourselves about slavery. Being a house slave was not easier than fieldwork. Proximity to wealth and refinement did not guarantee safety or freedom. The illusion of comfort concealed constant control, relentless surveillance, and psychological strain. The dresses she sewed, the hair she styled, the secrets she carried, all were tokens of labor extracted, autonomy denied. Being close to power was not power at all. It was the most delicate cage of all, where one misstep could cost everything. It forces us to confront the brutal truth. Freedom cannot be measured by comfort or location. It is a state of being denied to those whose bodies and lives were owned. What we see in the Great House is elegance built on the foundation of control and oppression, and the closer the proximity, the sharper the loss of self.